Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I will be covering Nate Dogg. Rest in peace to Nate Dogg, by the way, the OG vocalist of the hip hop genre, one of the first voices, from the gangster side of hip hop to have a voice like he did that led the way for other artists like himself. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But until Nate Dogg, we had never seen kind of a street looking guy with that kind of vocal ability. Usually guys will sing on the hook, but it didn't sound anything like Nate Dogg. He had a very smooth voice, and I believe if he would have had better backing or better support back then, he would have been even bigger artist. Kind of like your CeeLos and things like that. But he showed that looks were deceiving, and I remember the first time seeing Nate Dogg, not knowing he was a singer, and he started singing. I'm like, whoa, like, dang, this guy can sing. I thought he was a rapper, which I don't think I ever heard him truly rap. But he was an amazing vocalist, and it's just an amazing sight to see somebody do that. Compared to like a Spud Webb who was 5'6" dunking, or seeing somebody like agile like Shaq being 7 foot, being able to have the footwork he had and the domination that he opposed on the court. It was one of those things that you weren't used to seeing, because usually guys that short wasn't dunking, and usually guys that tall wasn't that athletic. But it showed that looks were deceiving, and Nate Dogg was definitely that, from his ability to work with hip hop artists and being able to be an R&B voice, so to speak, within the genre of hip hop. And he was a part of that whole G-Funk era, which was classic time, and it was a huge sound, especially in California during the early '90s, around that Above the Rim time, and New Jack Swing era. All that stuff kind of intermingled in, and he was meshed into that time period of the Death Row era, which he was a part of the Death Row era. He One of his the Dog Pound albums were um, underneath the Death Row label, but he had a lot of different labels and a lot of different collaborations. He was also a part of that 213 group with Snoop Dogg, and of course, he was with the Dog Pound as well. But he helped influence artists today who admitted that he influenced them. Artists like Chris Brown, Anderson .Paak, and definitely Ty Dolla Signs. These artists who don't have the typical look of an R&B singer, who have this gangster ability, who have a street side to them, and are not just singing in leather jackets or leather vests, or singing with their shirts off. These guys are rapping with bandanas on, with baseball caps and things like that, or gang affiliated and things like that. So he created that lane for these artists to be able to do so, because it was never seen in hip hop. Even to today, you only see a couple artists like that. Ty Dolla is a big one, and he's from California as well, just like Nate Dogg. But the blueprint was set from him, um, being able to have the look that he has, being able to have that hip hop feel to him, but being an R&B singer, but being more closely knitted to hip hop than R&B, but just having those elements of hip hop within your R&B ness, being able to use profanity and things like that. I was still shocked about artists like Iman back in the day, who actually cursed in their lyrics. I didn't hear that up until that point, but that definitely set the trend of artists being able to incorporate hip hop elements into their music from an R&B standpoint. And Nate Dogg was definitely the forefather, or the grandfather, so to speak, of that. But he was also held as king of the hooks, which he was on some of the most classic hooks in hip hop history. And when you go back to these songs, huge songs like The Regulator with Warren G. Now, this song was the soundtrack of G Funk for the '90s. Definitely Warren G's biggest hit to date. And it's partially because of the songwriting or the vocalism from Nate Dogg. 50 Cent song, 21 Questions, a song that was probably, in 2003, 2004, one of the biggest songs of those years, from that huge album that 50 Cent had called Get Rich or Die Trying. Nate Dogg was a perfect pair with 50 Cent. It was an unusual pairing now that I think about it, just from an East Coast, West Coast type of deal. But nevertheless, the song worked and it was a great hit for both artists. One of the songs that will live on forever. One of the greatest concepts to a song as well. All About You with Tupac. This was during Tupac's height of his career. But Nate Dogg definitely had a great vocal ability that accentuated hip hop songs, and that "All About You" song is definitely one of the classic Tupac songs. "Area Coast" with Ludacris, definitely one of those. I got hoes. Now, when you hear that song, you still sing that part on the chorus, whether you can sing it or not. Like I couldn't sing it, but um, definitely a classic song that was one of Ludacris' biggest hits. And then "Till I Collapse" with Eminem. A lot of people don't remember that one, but that was definitely a great song that he had with Eminem. Um, but yeah, he's just a classic artist, man. And if you haven't listened to Nate Dogg's music, you definitely have to listen to it. He dropped a couple solo projects, really only really one. The other one was, I believe, like a collaborative album with a bunch of different artists on it. But he should have definitely released more solo things. But I think he worked better as on the hooks with these artists and making the songs bigger for the artists because hip hop does need a little vocalization and does need some of that pop appeal to it. And he definitely bring that for the songs to help these songs be major songs. But one of my favorite memories from Nate Dogg is when he was on the Head of State movie and he was singing between the interludes of the things that Chris Rock went through as a character in the previous scenes. So he was singing that after that, and it was pretty funny, and it was also pretty entertaining just because of the vocalization of Nate Dogg. Um, he has one of those amazing voices in hip hop, and you can't tell the story of hip hop without mentioning Nate Dogg because he's a big influence, especially in the '90s and early 2000s of the hip hop scene. And if he would have, been still here today, he would have had some influence on, even the younger artists. Whether he was mixing up with like a Lil Durk or something, or he had stuff with, um, NBA YoungBoy or somebody, he would have been up there still doing his thing because they know what he meant to hip hop. And he's one of those artists that you felt like you made it when you have him on a song with you. Similar to when I talk about all the time with Mary J. Blige and artists like that. And Beyonce, of course. But Regulator still hits the same as when I first heard it, and Area Coast is still legendary. It's still one of those songs that stood the test of time, and Nate Dogg's music will stand the test of time. So rest in peace to Nate Dogg, and his music still lives on. And until next time, I'll see you next time.